You give 100%, you expect zero. We have an opportunity to have a second chance every single day. When we wake up, we get to decide how we want to make it happen. I'm telling people all the time, your network is your net worth. I talked earlier about my mom telling me the importance of choosing your friends wisely. Everybody has a story. Everybody has done something. Everyone's been through something. Everyone's going through something. I would say, try new things and put in the work. I mean, listen, we can all be dreamers. Building your network is the best advice that I've been given. All these people that I can learn from, and I can figure out ways to help them. It's the power of, being intentional, having that out there, and then sharing that. You just never know who knows who. It just goes to show you never know who's going through what.
Good morning, Coach Kelly here with a very special guest, Bruce Waller with Armstrong Relocation. He is Vice President of Relocation, and we have a very interesting history. We met each other about literally 20 years ago this year. My wife and I were living in the Woodlands, and we were seeking to, north of Houston, we were seeking to relocate back to Dallas, and I was looking for a job. She was looking for a job. And Bruce at the time was working for the federal companies in the moving industry, and his company hired me. And so we moved to Dallas and we got started, and literally a few weeks in, we had a training to go to out in California near LA. We were out there for about a week. We came back, and I still remember the first morning I walked in the office, they asked me, they're kidding, but what did you do out there? I was like, what do you mean? They decided to close the Dallas office. I mean, quite literally. And so I went back into the furniture business. Bruce went to work for Armstrong, and we've just, we went our separate ways, but we've always stayed loosely connected via social media and otherwise. And so here we are, just a very different season of life today. I've invited him on my corporate wellness show to find out more about what he does in the moving industry. He has an award-winning book, Find Your Lane. He's been doing his podcast now for several years. I mean, he just has a lot to offer. And so, Bruce, welcome.
Kelly, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. When you talked about that 20 years ago, I all of a sudden had this flashback, and I knew that you had something special in you. And yeah, we as soon as you came on, we closed the branch, and what a journey it's been since.
Well, and that was a very strange, the way that all worked out, but everything happens for a reason. So Bruce, let's jump in. How did you get started in the moving industry in the first place?
Yeah. So I've been in the moving industry since 1995. Interesting story. My parents are bowling center proprietors. And so I always thought I was going to be, in the bowling center, managing bowling centers or bowling on the professional tour, just anything around bowling. And after I graduated from college, my father gave me the opportunity to manage his bowling center. And what I found out was the alignment wasn't quite what I was wanting. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going for. I just knew the alignment wasn't there. I was working nights and weekends. My wife was a school teacher. She worked in the daytime. And so trying to raise a family is very difficult. And my brother was in the moving industry. And I called my brother and I said, hey, do you know anybody that's hiring? And he said, hey, I just happen to be moving to Houston, and I think our company is going to have an opportunity. And so I joined his company, and that's how I got my start in Dallas, Texas.
And the rest is history.
So, the rest is history. It's been quite a journey.
So give me a favorite client story. I mean, I know you have a lot of years to pull from, but give me a favorite client story.
Oh man, there are so many. You sent me a few questions ahead of time, and I was like, there are so many stories, from cats and being lost on a move and finding them later in a moving van. But for me, my favorite all-time client story, I actually shared it in my first book, Find Your Lane. And it was really when I started with the Armstrong Company, and that was in 2004. And what had happened was I'd spent 7 or 8 years in operations and decided to pivot to sales and marketing. And during that journey, I I knew the business very well, but I had not been in that national account sales role, and so I knew that my job was not to get the company phone to ring, but to get my phone to ring. I had to figure out how can I, so I just started calling friends and family and letting them know what I did, and a friend of mine called up and he said, "Hey, I'm going to have my banker call you. He needs to move his mom." I said, "That's fantastic." I mean, this is in my first, I think is in my first couple of weeks on the job. And so the banker called me, and John, he said, "Hey, I need some help. I'm really stressed out here. I need to move my mom from Dallas to Houston. She's in assisted living and she has a bed. Actually, she didn't have a bed. She had a mattress and she had a nightstand and a couple of boxes." And you've been in the moving business for a short time, so that's not a very big move. And I'm not going to make a whole lot of money for it, but that was a very, very big move for the customer. So big. He was so stressed, and me being able to handle that for him really took the stress off of him. And so we took care of that move and got her set up. And that day is the day I realized I was doing something really special, really helping people through a very difficult time. And having said that, I've been in the industry for 8 years. I didn't ever look at it the way I looked at it after that call with the customer and being able to help his mom. And since then, I have really just doubled down on service. That was a great story for me. And as a matter of fact, I shared it in the book and continue to share that because we all have an opportunity. We just got to find it.
Bruce, it sounds to me like that was a perspective shifting experience for you. And I think perspective is everything. I mean, that affected you moving forward and how you operate, how you see your business.
Yeah, no question. Since then, I just said, "Hey, how can I serve people? Whether, it's through networking events or through my business or through our community, whatever the case may be." And I've done that in different ways. I started writing a blog and I thought, you know what, maybe I can serve someone by writing a blog. And then later I published a book. And then of course, started the podcast. So I've really just focused, and he really helped me see that, see the possibilities of what I could do for others. And so today, whenever I'm helping clients, mostly in the national account arena, whenever they need to move employees from one location to the other, I really try to let them know how we can really help them in that way. You never know what someone's going through when they're moving.
No, Bruce, you don't. And I don't know if I got this from Gittimer. I really don't remember, but the idea of Bruce and I are both big time Jeffrey Gittimer fans. But the idea of treating every client like $1 million customer, number one, because it's the right thing to do. But number two, you never know that little lady that you moved and you took care of that guy. I mean, he could have called you 6 months later because you made such a great impression on him and handed you the proverbial $1 million move. I mean, you never know when things like that are going to happen. But if you blow it with the small something, because and they can smell that on you a mile away, I mean, you can tarnish or ruin a relationship forever just because you treat it in the wrong way.
I really have had that focus since I started with Armstrong, and probably before then, but really noticed it with Armstrong. I remember helping a lady. She said, "Hey, Bruce, we get 3 estimates on each move, and through through a bid process, and we do 3 or 4 moves a year." And I'm like, a lot of companies wouldn't want to really spend a lot of time with that particular company. But I did because, one move is just as important as 100 moves. And a few years later, that account bought another company and it turned into 20 moves. And then they bought another company and it turned into 100 moves. And today they do 200 moves a year. You just don't ever know. But I think if you really have that mindset, and really it goes back to the golden rule, right? Treat people how you want to be treated at the end of the day. But I really think that the people that have that mindset are the people that are winning, not just in business, but every area of their life.
I agree. I agree. So, what's the biggest mistake that you see clients commit with regard to their moves? I mean, where do you have to like manage the process and you know, people may have misconceptions coming into the move, and you have to go through a little bit of an education process and tell them how it's really going to be. I mean,
I
does
think
that relate?
yeah, yes, absolutely. I think the biggest mistake is where companies just give the employee money and say, "Hey, here's X amount of dollars. We'll see you at destination." And the reason why I say, and we call that in our terms, we call that a lump sum moving program. And most companies have a lump sum moving program. They may help executives with a full service relocation, but they're giving, maybe their managers or the new hires some money and saying, "Hey, go get you a U-Haul truck and get your stuff in the truck and get it to the other side." But what people don't realize is when they give them money, well, let me just say the mistake is when they give them money and they don't give them any resources. And and the reason why that is many times the customer, the employee is busy working. So the spouse is often in charge of the move coordination and they don't know who to call for a moving company or and they're relying everything on the internet. And we know today how the internet sometimes can't be trustworthy. And so we really rely on referrals and friends, but a lot of people just have a hard time with that. I probably get 3 calls a year from someone saying, "Hey, Bruce, we should have called you, but we moved XYZ company. It's a broker and they got our stuff. What can we do?" And so I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I see. And I try to, really educate people that are in charge of relocation that, there's moving programs come in all shapes and sizes. The key is just to do something for the employee to be able to provide them resources. And if you can do that, at least you're helping them in some way.
So, kind of a related question. What do you think? What do you think people misunderstand about the moving industry? Any misconceptions?
I really think it's like a lot of different industries. I think it's all about sameness, right? Moving companies, they're all the same. They're all, trucks and boxes and warehouses and you can say that for a lot of different industries, right? And so what I've found in the 3 different companies that I've worked for is that companies are not the same. They're not built different. They have different cultures. They have a different way of approaching not just the customer, but when things get off track, because that's usually when you need to have a great partner is when things get off track. I mean, when things are going good, hey, you can use anybody, right? But when things get off track, that's where you usually see the separation. In my experience through the different companies, the first thing I noticed for our company is that we have an audit program. So our invoicing is very, very, very good here. Well, that can be a big problem for a lot of companies if the invoicing is not well. I just got a call from a customer that uses 3 or 4 different companies for their relocations. I just got a call from the CEO just last week, and she said, "Bruce, what can we do here? We have one of our companies, they're not wanting to help us with a claim." And after I doing some research, I found out that particular company did not have an in-house claims management program like we do. And so we don't ever run into that. They're sending it off to the corporate office and kind of outsourcing it, saying, "Hey, we can't help you." And so they're not built differently. And I think that's the misconception is, hey, just call a moving company. Well, you need to call the right moving company.
I agree. So, what makes you feel inspired to do what you do?
Oh man, I get it. Listen, I get inspired all the time. I was actually thinking about, when I would say, if I'm thinking about something offhand is when I get a text from a customer and they've got a picture of them or our moving truck in the background or the moving guys. And I mean, think about it. Moving is exhausting. It's stressful. but yet they're sending a picture saying, I love Armstrong. I love our move. Things are going great. That's inspiring to me, right? Because it really takes a team. It takes our moving operations to get out there and get it done. And to receive that from a customer, that's really inspiring. I was actually thinking about all the times I've walked through surveys, whenever the customer calls and says, hey, we'd like to move, and you walk through their home and you calculate what they have to move so you can give them a price and a moving plan. And whenever I'm, walking through a home and I see, several years ago, I was walking through a home for a lady. She just lost her husband. And I was just like, I was in this moment of, I'm so glad that I have this platform to help this lady during this trying time. And so, that inspires me, just to be able to be in that, on this journey. And then anytime our employees are, excited or telling me a story about a move, that's inspiring to me.
Okay. So when did you get the idea to write your book?
Oh my goodness. I will tell you, when I was about 40, I don't know if I was 41, 42, but during that time, I had decided that I was going to write down a list of things that I want to have achieved when I'm 50.
Okay.
So that was, 10 years out. So I wrote all these things down, I want to, my kid, and I tried to picture it as if I'm in that moment. So I said, hey, I want to be married for, during that time, I said, hey, I want to be married for 25 years. I want to have one kid out of college. I want to have one kid that's a sophomore. My other kid, just whatever time that's in. I'd like to be a part of the President's Club for Armstrong. I'd like to do, all these different things. And one of the things I wrote down was write a book. And it wasn't for anything else. I just was always thought, I love reading books. I have been inspired by books and authors and conferences and just the wisdom that's been shared with me. And I thought, wouldn't that be great to write a book one day? So I just put that down. And several years later, I was looking at that list and I noticed what was interesting about that list. I achieved every single thing on that list. So the power of goals, right? The power of, being intentional, the power of being purposeful. But the one thing I had not achieved was writing a book. And so that year, I think I shared that with someone, and they said, well, what are you waiting on? And I'm like, what am I waiting on? And so in July of 2016, I decided I was going to do a challenge, and I was going to write 1,000 words a day for 30 days and just write a book. And so that's really how that started. And I finished that book in July of the end of July. I had 35,000 words. The book was not any good at that time, but I had some different people write it. I got me an editor, and then I published that book in June or July of 2017. And that's kind of how Find Your Lane was born. And it was I was really proud of that accomplishment.
Well, I can say from, I consider you a friend. And when I first saw that you had written that book, I was proud of you on the one hand. I was honestly envious on the other, because I have my book right there. I just now I've written, good gosh, I'm about to get to my 100th blog. And my blogs are not short. I started that back in 15. I've written enough blog content that would equate to a book. I've just not made it my priority to get my book done. So
what's interesting about that, Kelly, and I maybe I can inspire you a little bit here, is whenever I decided to write 1,000 words a day for 30 days, I had actually started, when you think about writing a book, I'd actually started writing the book when I joined Armstrong in 2004 and just didn't realize it when I started a newsletter.
Okay.
And when I started the newsletter, that shaped my behaviors, that created habits for me to write once a month. And then in 2011, I morphed that transitioned that into a blog. And I called it a relocation minute with Bruce Waller. Today it's called Move to Inspire. And I continue to write. But when I was writing that 1,000 words a day for 30 days in 2016, many days I would just take the what's off my blog and say, oh, that's a great story. I'm going to put that there. And I copied and pasted that. And I might have 3,000 words in one day. I might have 500 words in one, whatever that was. But I used a lot of material for my blog. And that was, yeah, that really helped me. And so starting the blog, it was really what really drove that process for me.
Okay. I have some work to do.
You'll
So
do
what
it.
about your podcast? When did that come about?
Life in the Leadership Lane podcast. I got to tell you, that's been quite a journey. I just dropped my 168th episode. I'm in year 4, season 4, I guess you'd call it. So what happened was I wrote my book in 2017. 2 years later, in 2019, I've always wanted to do a journal, so I put together a journal called Mile Markers, and so people could capture their everyday. And then in 2020, we all know what happened in this pandemic, and I'm in sales, and I've really built my career on one coffee at a time, right? Networking and meeting people for coffee and lunch. And all of a sudden the Starbucks were closed. Everybody's indoors and nobody, everybody's just trying to figure out what's going on. And I said to myself, and I'd been interviewed on a couple of different podcasts, and I thought, I've always thought that was a pretty neat thing. I actually had the idea about 5 years earlier to do like a Jimmy Kimmel bit. Jay Leno, where they go out on the street and they do a little street bit, right? They want to, hey, how's things going? So me going into the office saying, hey, tell me about the workplace or culture or whatever that is. I've always thought about that, but I just never really had the bandwidth. And then in March of 2020, all of the pandemic happened. I thought, well, I need to figure something out, because if I'm looking at my sales numbers every month, I'm going to get really depressed. And so I thought, well, you know what, now might be the time. And why? Yeah, you always have to go back to your why, right? You have to know, why do you want to start a podcast? That's so important, because what I learned was when I was writing my book that you have to have an anchor. And if you don't have a why, then you won't sustain it. You'll get going. I think the average podcast is about 10 episodes, believe it or not. And it's because, you find out that you get into 10, 20 episodes and you figure out, hey, that's 4 or 5 hours a week. That's a lot of work. So my why was 3 things. I wanted to stay connected. I had to figure out, how can I stay connected to people? How can I stay visible in the community? And I thought, well, the podcast will give me some visibility, because I could interview people and I could put that out there. But the one that I said as my anchor was, I want to stay educated. I want to keep learning. I want to keep learning from people who are experts in their field. And so that was my why: connected, and stay visible and stay educated. And so in April of 2020, I called a buddy of mine who had a podcast and said, hey, would you be my first guest? I'm going to try this out. And I actually called it Leading Leaders. This is an interesting story. I shared this in my new book. And after I finished interviewing him on the podcast, I said, man, that was terrific. I'm so excited about this journey, but the name, it just doesn't sound, it's just not grabbing me. And he said, well, what? And so I have the book, Find Your Lane. And I said, I've always loved that song, Life in the Fast Lane. He said, well, why don't you call it Life in the Leadership Lane? That's how Life in the Leadership Lane podcast was born. And so I just started interviewing, and I've been doing it, putting out an episode every week. I take off 2 weeks at the end of the year. So 50 episodes a year. And it's been an incredible journey. I've had some incredible guests on the show. And the reason why I called it Life in the Leadership Lane is I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into, I serve a big HR community, because they're the buyer of relocation services. I serve in Texas SHRM. I do a lot for the HR community, but I want to be, anybody can be a leader. and you don't have to have a title to be a leader. And so I wanted to be able to have different people on the show. And since then, I've got to have people like somebody I admire, like Bob Stoops, former head football coach for the University of Oklahoma, or a
Right.
professional football player who's won a Super Bowl, or on and on and on and on, a professional bowler that I admire. And so that's why I called it that. And it's been an incredible journey.
So I'm just curious, it's on leadership, but what's your strategy on who you invite, and how do you go about reaching out and connecting with these people?
Yeah. So, we both heard, we're both big Darren Hardy fans. Your network is your net worth. And so I really just went out to my network and I just said, hey, I'm just going to start interviewing people that I admire. I'm part of Texas SHRM, so I thought, wouldn't it be great to also highlight some leadership in Texas SHRM? So that's part of my strategy. I admire many of my customers. They serve in as directors and managers and vice presidents and CHROs of their company. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to get them on and highlight what makes them great? And so I focus on customers. I focus on future customers. I focus on just people that really inspire me, and just someone that I think would be good to learn from. And that's really a strategy. I was telling somebody one day on a podcast, this is a great story. I have this list, and then I have this wish list. And so I asked after I got done the podcast, I said, hey, who's on your wish list? And they said, well, we don't really have a wish list. Who's on your wish list? I said, oh my goodness. Mine is so long, right? I've got Troy Aikman. I played football in high school against Troy Aikman. I'd love to have him on the podcast. I would love to have former President George Bush on my podcast. Wouldn't that be great? I don't know if that ever happened. I'd love to have Bob Stoops on my podcast. I admire him so much. And the lady on the other side said, well, I can help you with that one. I went, what? And so it's the power of, being intentional, having that out there, and then sharing that. You just never know who knows who. I sent a note. She said, hey, send a note to his secretary. I sent the note to his secretary. He had a book called No Excuses that was out. So that's how I really framed it. I said, hey, I want to talk to you about your book. I sent a note, and I used the 100-0 principle, Kelly. And I think you probably know this. 100-0 principle is this: you give 100% and you expect zero. So I
Sounds
sent
like
that
something
email out.
Gidler would say.
I sent that out. And when it came back, and didn't expect anything to come back, I just said, you know what? I didn't even tell anybody. I didn't even tell anybody because, they'll be like, oh yeah, good luck with that. And then I got an email that said, Coach Stoops will meet you for your video call at 11:30 on Wednesday. And I'm like, whoa.
Whoa.
And so I prepared for that very well and had that was a highlight for me, because I've big OU fan him for the 17 years he was head coach. And, since then though, and that's the way I approach everything. It's like, hey, give 100%, and don't be afraid to go for whatever you're going for, but you need to know what that is ahead of time.
So Bruce, I'll tell you something. I'll give you three, and then a story that just happened to me last week. John Maxwell, Darren Hardy, Jeffrey Gitomer. Why not? I've met all three. I've literally met all three. So why not? I mean, if you're going to swing for the fences.
That's right. But
last Tuesday, it occurred to me to reach out to, he's been the most dominant influence in my life in nutrition. I met this guy right after I graduated from college back in 91. I was living in the Woodlands. And when I was referred to Keith, I joined a little gym in the Woodlands, and I was referred to him by just a lady that I met in the gym. And that started our relationship. I had no idea who this guy was outside of taking care of Joe Schmoes like me and you off the street. It was in hindsight that I learned that he also worked with some of the most elite professional bodybuilders in the world, including from 87 to 93. The name may not resonate, but it won't matter. Lee Labrada was one of the top 4 in the world for 7 years in a row. He's an icon in the bodybuilding world. Keith was his nutrition coach. And so I thought, how cool would it be if I could get Keith on my show? And I knew he had retired a few years ago, so last Tuesday, but I knew the lady that had taken over his practice. because I'd met her before as well. So I sent her an email on Tuesday. She answers me on Wednesday. My phone rings Wednesday afternoon. It's him. And I have him booked for next Monday. But it was very, I mean, we had not talked in about 10 years. And he said, and if it works out well between us, I'll see what I can do to get Lee on your show, as in Lee Labrada, former one of the very best in the world. That wasn't even in my realm of thinking when I thought about reaching out to him in the first place. But you just never know who knows who.
You got to
how
think
things
big.
can work out.
Yeah, you got to think big. I remember when I first got into my business in 2004 as a sales executive, I wrote down a list of companies that I was going to call, but I made a dream list. Here's one day I'd like to do business with these companies. And 20 years later, I do business with a lot of those companies. But I wrote that down ahead of time. And that's kind of the same thing with the podcast. You can do that with personal development. You can do that with whatever that is, right? You can do that with fitness, whatever that is. You need to write down, hey, here's my list of things I'm trying to accomplish. But one day, I'd like to accomplish this. And you write that down and you'll see that you will be moving towards that. You will start surrounding yourself by people that can get you there. And I think that's, for me, the key. I remember my mom years ago when I was a teenager, she always talked to me about, choose your friends wisely. And I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. But today I realized what she was saying. She said, build your network, surround yourself by great people, and serve those people, and they will help you get where you need to go.
Have you heard of a guy named Charlie Tremendous Jones?
I have.
So he has a quote, I'm paraphrasing, that the books you read and the people that you meet, say over the next, next 5 years, it'll make or break you. I mean, it's a simple concept, but it's powerful. So that's a great segue. What's the book? What is the book that's been the most impactful to you in your life?
I've there's a season for everything. When I was young, it was a young manager. The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership changed my career. I was managing my day at that time. And after I read that book, I started leading my life. I went from managing my days to leading my life because of 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. Yeah, you mentioned him earlier. I've been a huge fan. I've got to meet him on his Failing Forward tour. He was absolutely fantastic. I would say, though, that How to Win Friends and Influence People is probably got to be up there. Dale Carnegie. I remember taking a Dale Carnegie course. I remember the just over and over, your name is the sweetest sound that someone will ever hear. Your name, and I've tried to get good at that and be better at that area. But I would say those are probably the two that are up there. But I got to tell you, it's so interesting. I remember years ago setting a goal to try to read a book a quarter. Well, that was a big goal for me at the time. I had 3 kids. You got all these things you're juggling. Today, I have my own book club. We read 5 books a year, and we do it together. It's called Climb, Connect, Lead, Inspire, Mentor, and Build. And we do that online, so people all around the country can get on. But I probably, I don't know, I don't even keep track anymore. I probably read 20 books a year, and I just think that's that's really what shaped everything I do. That's where the ideas come from. I just got through reading Do What Matters Most by Schellenberger. And a lot of times you're not reading them for, hey, I need to start doing this. You're reading them more for like validation. Hey, am I on the right track? Oh man, that's everything I'm doing is I'm doing that. So a lot of times they're maybe not giving you new ideas. They're giving you just some validation. And so that's probably the 2 books that are up the top of me. I just got through reading the 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication by John Maxwell.
Is it good?
That was fantastic. Fantastic. It's a great book.
So
highly recommended.
he has, and I'll take your word for that. He has another book that this is probably 5 to 10 years old. I'm paraphrasing, but everyone communicates, but few connect. That's the essence of the title. And that's a fantastic book if you've not read that. I've not read his new one yet, but I need to.
He's a master at the title, the hook, isn't he? I mean, think about that. Everyone communicates, but few people connect. Look at your LinkedIn profile. How many connections do you have on there? You know, you'll be like, oh, I got a ton of them. How many people do you really know? Very few, very few. And that's what he's basically saying. Hey, you know, we got to go deeper. We got to build relationships. We got to really learn about people and serve people and help people and value people. And so, no, John Maxwell puts out a book. I recently heard he has 80 books out now that he's written. And someone asked him what was his favorite. And he said, the next one. I love that.
So he is an inspiration to me because if I have my facts right, he didn't write his first book until his 40s. And what inspired him to write the first book was he asked one of his friends, I want to say it's Les Giblin or Gibson or something like that. It doesn't matter. But he asked the guy, why do you write books? And the guy said, I want to impact people that I'll never meet. And that just fired John up, that whole idea of impacting people that he would never meet. And now, like you said, 80 books and 30, 40 million copies later, he's doing a pretty good job. But I mean,
well, I got to tell you,
he didn't get started until his 40s. It's never too late.
That's inspiring. I wrote my first book at 50. I wrote my second book 2 years later. I wrote my third book, Life in the Leadership Lane, in 2021. And the reason why I wrote Life in Leadership Lane, I really didn't have a plan to write that book. But when I was doing my podcast, I was a year into it. And I kept saying to myself, there's so much wisdom here. I just interviewed 50 of the most incredible people in the world. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool, rather than just writing them a little note saying, thank you for being on the podcast, wouldn't that be great to send them a book? And what if it was my book? And I signed it. And so that's what I did. I basically wrote Life in the Leadership Lane. I basically took information from the podcast and a lot of the wisdom that came out of the podcast. I put it together and started sending that out. And that was a lot of fun.
So, my friend, let me plant a seed in your mind, and you may already be there. You know the story of how Chicken Soup for the Soul came about? Jack Canfield. Have you read any of those?
I have.
So that first book, they went through heck and high water to get it done because no one wanted to publish it. But they finally got it published. But they put at the end of the book, if you have any stories to contribute, please reach out to us because we're considering doing a second book. They created a machine, book after book after book, with ongoing contributions from their readers. And they developed a system for, I guess, I say validating, but figuring out what stories would be good and what stories, wouldn't be. But so as long as you do your podcast, you've got book after book after book after book of content just waiting for you to write the book.
No question. I actually am in the middle of my, I say my third book. Mile Markers was my book that I published in 2019, but it's more of a journal. It's a publication. But my third book, I'm in the middle of it right now, and I'm using a lot of the content from the podcast that now that you say that, but it's more around changing lanes, and it's really about moving from success to significance. Because, early on, we're trying to figure out ways to be successful. But as we move through our careers, we really are wanting to move beyond that. We really are trying to move to significance. And success is about helping ourselves, and significance is really about helping others. And so Yeah. So I'm in the middle of that. So I'm hoping 2024 is the year that comes out. I don't know if it's going to be called Changing Lanes or something around that. It'd be around the lane, find your lane, life and leadership lane, maybe changing lanes, something around there.
Well,
But excited about that.
I'm sure it will be good. So let's have some fun with a few personal things. So what's your favorite sport?
Oh my goodness, favorite sport. Well, college football. We're in August of 2020. College football season is about to start. We are season ticket holders for OU football, so college football is probably my favorite this time of year. But I got to tell you, I was raised from a couple of bowling proprietors, and so bowling has always been my first love. I still love to watch it, and I have a lot of friends that continue to bowl. So bowling's right up there.
Okay. So what's the best compliment you've ever received?
You gave me hope.
Really?
I have a story. It's interesting. When I wrote my first book in 2017, um, I wrote it during peak moving season, so we're real busy during that time in 2016. I was having a great year, super busy, but I just decided, my why was big, so I wanted to get that book done. But as soon as I finished that, I had a guy reach out and said, "Hey, got your book. I love this. Very inspirational. I'd love for you to kick off our our association event to kick off the year." And so I said, okay, well, I'll do that. And so while I'm driving over to this event to speak to this group, and it was around relocation, but was more around residential relocation, right? You had the builders and people that were involved in on the residential side, and my focus was really more on the corporate side. But I thought, there's a reason for me to go over there. I want to go over there. I want to help. So I spoke to the group, and there was probably about 20 people there. There weren't a whole lot of people there. It was at Joe T. Garcia's. And if you haven't been over to Joe T. Garcia's, they have incredible food. So it was going to be a great lunch. And I spoke to the group, find your lane, change your GPS, change your career. I was really trying to encourage them to really get on a growth plan, be purposeful about everything you're doing, and serve, right? That's your GPS that's in the Find Your Lane book. And finished the session, didn't really get any like feedback. It was a fairly kind of dark room, and I didn't really, and at the time I was just really learning how to speak and engage an audience. So I didn't really ask questions and engage. I just presented. And at the end of the session, I had a couple people come up, say, "Hey, that was great. Thank you." And at the very end, before I was leaving, this lady came up to me and she said, "I wanted to come up here. I was waiting until everybody left, but I just want to let you know that today you gave me hope." And I said, "I gave you hope? That's a big word. Tell me more, please." And she was telling me that her husband had been diagnosed with cancer. And so for the last 7 or 8 years, she had been his caretaker, and she had put her dreams on the shelf, and they just collected dust, and she forgot about him. And now I don't know how old she was. She was probably, in her, maybe in her 50s, late 50s. And she thought like it was kind of over, like she just could really, and she said, "Now you've been like giving me this inspiration to pick up where I was, and now I'm going to go do this." She wrote a really great testimonial on my LinkedIn, and I just thought that day, we know where that message came from. My message came from above, but I got that platform to share that message. But it just goes to show you, you never know who's going through what. And I tell people all the time whenever I'm speaking, these books, what they've done is they've really moved me into the speaking arena. I do probably about 25 keynotes, speaking events a year. And every time I'm there, I always think there's one person in this room that is that lady that is right now needing this message. And so when she gave me that, of course, it's always great to get the text about, referrals, and we talked earlier about you doing a great job and all that. But when someone says you gave me hope, I don't know if there's anything better than that.
That'll make you sleep well at night.
Yeah, it's great.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, The best advice. I will say that I tell people, I'm telling people all the time, your network is your net worth. I talked earlier about my mom, telling me the importance of choosing your friends wisely. I think that building your network, is the best advice that I've been given. And every time I read something around that, it just validates that. And we talked about, the referrals from the podcast, getting Bob Stoops on. We talked about all that, it's your network is your net worth. It's that it's not just, it's not just about, hey, I have people now to get what I need. It's about, I have all these people that I can learn from, and I can like figure out ways to help them. And, it's really given me that, that sense of, I share all the time. It's really not a myth. When you find the work you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, whenever you're helping people, and serving people, and moving people and helping people with, being resourceful, it it just doesn't feel like you're working anymore. It just doesn't.
Have you ever heard of, well, he's an author and a speaker and a business owner, Harvey Mackay? He's an older
Yes,
gentleman.
of course.
You familiar?
Yes.
His book, How to Swim with the Sharks Without Being
Yeah.
Eaten Alive, and talk about provocative title. That was the first book on personal development I ever received as for a Christmas gift junior in college. But he has another book called, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, because it's what you just said. Dig your well before you're thirsty. And it's on the power of networking. Yeah. And he asked the question, again, this is kind of a paraphrase, but he said, how many people can you call at 2 a.m. that regardless of the circumstances, they would come and bail you out? And most people don't have a very long list when it comes to that question. And and I don't remember what the number that he gave, but it was pretty lengthy, because he's been networking for I guess he's in his 70s, maybe 80. He's an older gentleman, but I mean, he's been networking his whole life. I mean, and he's perfected the art of networking for his life. It's a good book.
I sent out a message. I've done this before. I've done some different branding exercises and sent things out around, hey, when you think of me, what comes to mind? Right. And I'm always hoping that relocation's in there somewhere, because, a lot of times we post things on social media, we talk about different things, and people will remember that. And so I went through a branding exercise, and a relocation certainly was in there, but the majority of people use the word connector.
Really?
Connector. And that's really what's really come out of all of that, is that I have immersed myself so much into building my network. I've become a connector, because I love that so much. Like, I love being connected to someone. So if I love that so much, now all of a sudden you can help others feel that way too, by connecting them to someone. It's incredible. It's just an incredible of, I don't know, it's a way of living. But to be able to connect someone, that's an honor.
You know who else considers himself a connector? And you've met him.
Who's that?
John Maxwell.
Oh, no question.
I mean,
no question.
I've heard him say that many times, that he considers himself a connector.
I've in his book, the 16 Undeniables of Communication that he just put out, I've really been studying connection in a different way, not just connecting. Hey, you know what? You need to connect with Kelly when it comes to personal fitness or whatever that is, right? But it's about connecting with your audience whenever you're speaking, and really just dialing in. And I'm really trying to, that's probably the area I'm trying to work on right now the most, is just becoming a master in that area. Because, I remember when Mel Robbins was on stage with Darren Hardy and John Maxwell, and many others at a conference. And she said, a conversation can change your life. And I thought she was standing right in front of me saying, Bruce, like her connection was powerful. Darren Hardy has that, but I've been trying to really become a master in that area.
So, back to John for just a moment, because I think it's a good story. He has a habit of asking the question to people when he meets people, who do you know that I should know? And for the most part, it's not that he doesn't get an answer, but it's usually not a very impactful situation. That question led him to being connected to John Wooden. And John Wooden ended up being a mentor to him for the last number of years of his life. And that was, John was already successful, but still having Coach Wooden as a mentor, that was a game changer. And it was fun asking that simple question.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to where I was talking about, having your dream list. And I think that's or wish list, and people you want to have on the podcast, or if you're in personal fitness, people you want to meet, or whatever that case may be, always having that list around there saying, hey, who do you know that I should know? And by the way, who do you want to know? Well, you know what? I want to know George Bush. I want to know Troy Aikman. So having that kind of helps you kind of guide that, and also shapes your perspective and your I don't know, your work planning and your habits, all of those little things that lead to the big things, right? One of the book you mentioned, favorite book. I remember at a time in my life when I picked up The Compound Effect. You're talking about Darren Hardy. That was a monumental book for me, because it reminded me that, hey, you're doing all these little things every day. You're putting out a blog and nobody's reading it. You're putting out a newsletter. You're going to the meeting. You're going to do the survey. You're doing this. You're doing this. And then one day somebody says, wow, how'd you do all that? I did it every day. So, yeah, good stuff.
That book, and I have read the physical copy, but I bought the audio version first before Lifetime, and that's been 5 years. So, I mean, years ago, and I've listened to it countless times. But the thing that I learned from that book is the power of, or giving me a long-term perspective, and how baby steps in the moment can add up to massive change, for better, for worse.
Yeah.
But little things in the moment, what that can lead to over the course of time. But that's a phenomenal book. I mean, it's one of my favorites. All right. Three more questions.
Okay.
If you could have dinner with three people, past or present, and/or combination, who would they be?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I never met my grandfather. He was killed in World War II. He was part of a explosion in Port Chicago, killed over 300 men. They were loading ammunition on one of the ships. And today I get to honor him by serving in the Carry the Load organization, who honors our military and servicemen and women that have lost their lives in the line of duty. And so I've never met him, but I would love to have dinner with him and just have what was life like back then. And I'd love to have my grandma, she's passed since, but I'd love to have her there I'd just love to see them, have a picture of them both when they were young. And I just love to have a conversation with them. And then the third person is probably mentioned President George Bush. I just admire his leadership. And I got to see him in Sherm in New Orleans in 2022, and just first class.
Okay. So what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
It's interesting. On my podcast, my last question I ask all my guests is, if you're, what would your 10 years older self say to you today if you went up and answered the door? If he was knocking, he answered the door, what would he say to you today? And so the question, when you asked me, what advice would I give my 20, I was like, man, that's right there around that. But I would just say, I've really focused on valuing people. I think that, everybody has a story. Everybody has done something. Everyone's been through something. Everyone's going through something. Just value people. I would say, try new things and put in the work. I mean, listen, we can all be dreamers, but until we actually put in the work, nothing happens. And so I would say that. And lastly, I mean, you mentioned the compound effect earlier. I would just say it really works. It really works. You just keep doing the little things every day. I'm thinking about my fitness journey. I was at the gym this morning. I'm 5 days a week at our gym here. And it's, 10 years ago, I didn't feel this way or look this way. And it's been the little showing up every single day. That would be my advice.
I'm proud of you to hear that. So one more, and
Thanks.
this is the legacy question.
Okay.
Because you talked about the difference. I forget the words used exactly, but the shift to significance. So what's the legacy question? What is Bruce's legacy?
Yeah. There's a story. I've seen it on different videos, and it's around Michael Jordan. He says, "I have failed many times, which is why I succeed." And when I think about that, I think about all the times that I failed in my career and how dark that was, like that black cloud that just came over my head. And I thought life was over. I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to lose this, or whatever that case may be. But I got better from that. And I thought about a story as I think about that. And I want to share this story to kind of conclude here. But it's a story about when I received a call, and a gentleman asked me to come and give him an estimate for his move. He needed a survey. And so I said, okay, that sounds great. Wednesday, I'll see you next Wednesday at 1:00. And next Wednesday at 1:00 rolled around, and I forgot all about it. And then about 3:00 that day, I realized I forgot to go to the appointment. And one of the things I hate most is disappointing people. And so I thought, well, I can just, I'll just forget it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to move on. He probably got another moving guy to help him, but I couldn't do that. So I picked up the phone, I called him, and I owned it. I said, hey, listen, Joe, I forgot about the appointment. I'm sorry. And I apologize. If there's an opportunity for me to come back out, I'll do it. But I did it. And he said, that's funny, Bruce, because I had two guys coming out and the other guy forgot the appointment too. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. What are the chances of this happening? I said, listen, can I have another chance? He said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you another chance. You come out. So I went out there and I did the survey, and I got the move. And it's a great story because it's a story of second chances. Is what that is. And I want to just leave that with anyone that's listening, is that, we have an opportunity to have a second chance every single day. When we wake up, we get to decide how we want to make it happen, right? Do we want to build that dream list today? Or do we want to start working out today? Or do we want to start writing today? Or do we want to start being a better neighbor today, or being a better husband, father, brother, dad, whatever that is? We have the second chance to do that every single day. We just have to decide to do that. We just have to take action to do that. We just have to put in the work to do that. That would be my, I don't know, you can say my legacy is I just want to encourage people to just wake up and just start where you're at today. Because just like you said earlier, John Maxwell didn't start writing a book till he was 40. And I wrote my first one at 50. But remember, you're gonna make mistakes. And just remember, those mistakes are what make you successful. And so, hey, I don't know if maybe there's somebody that's listening that might have helped. It's helped me. I share that because I try to remind myself. I continue to make mistakes, But I know every time I make one, I'm going to be better for it.
That reminds me of the words of the great late Zig Ziglar: failure is an event, not a person.
Mm,
And as long as you're learning from the experience, it's just an experience. Learn from it and
yeah.
move on, and don't just let it go. So,
Yeah.
Bruce, this has been amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me on, Kelly. I'm so excited about your journey ahead. I remember when I first started doing a podcast, I'm trying to figure it out. I had some failure along the way. And but here, 4 years later, it's been an incredible journey. I'm proud of you. I'm excited for you. I'm going to be promoting you and just watching you just help others get better. And so I would say to you, keep inspiring, my friend.
Thank you, sir, and the same to you. So I will let you go. Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, see you, man.
All right, goodbye.